The crystal glasses barely stopped trembling when he said it. Fire her. And make sure she never works in this city again. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They were spoken with the calm certainty of a man used to watching lives rearrange themselves at the sound of his voice. Kang Min-jae, head of the Biko syndicate, one of the most feared crime families operating between Seoul and New York, didn't look at the waitress when he gave the order. To him, she was already erased. He hadn't noticed the subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. He hadn't noticed the manager's face draining of color. He hadn't noticed the way the sommelier quietly set down the bottle he was carrying and stepped back. And he definitely hadn't noticed the way the other Korean businessmen at nearby tables suddenly avoided eye contact, not out of indifference, but out of something closer to second-hand dread. Because if Kang Min-jae had paused for just a moment, he would have realized he had just ordered the blacklisted destruction of the wrong woman. If you enjoy stories where power meets consequences, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because tonight's story is about what happens when arrogance outruns information. The restaurant was called Myri, an upscale Korean fusion establishment in Manhattan, polished marble floors, gold-accented lighting, and private dining rooms shielded by frosted glass panels. Deals were made there. Alliances were formed, and sometimes reputations were buried. Nia Park adjusted her apron behind the host stand and inhaled slowly. She wore the standard black uniform, simple, elegant, forgettable. Her hair was pulled into a neat bun. Her name tag read, Nia. No last name. No history. No indication that beneath the calm expression and measured posture stood the adopted daughter of the most powerful crime boss in South Korea. She had once lived in a mansion overlooking the Han River in Seoul. She had sat at tables where generals and senators spoke carefully around her father. She had watched men twice her age lower their eyes when he entered a room. Now she carried plates. That was by design. 3 months ago, she had made a mistake. A reckless decision, sneaking out to attend an underground art event tied to a rival family. Nothing criminal, just careless. It created vulnerability. It embarrassed her father. And her father did not tolerate carelessness. So instead of shouting, instead of punishment, he issued something far worse. You will learn humility, he had said. And humility, for Nia, came in the form of waitressing in Manhattan under strict instructions. No special treatment.
No intervention.
No revealing your name. You earn your discipline. She accepted it without argument. Because the man who adopted her from a Chicago foster system at age 9 was not someone you argued with. His name was Park Tae-shin, the undisputed head of the Baekdu Alliance, the #1 Mafia boss in Korea, and the only person in the world whose disappointment hurt her. She had carried that weight into every shift, every table, every order taken from men who looked through her like glass. Not because she was weak, but because she understood the lesson. Humility wasn't degradation. It was clarity. Her father wanted her to see the world from the ground before she stood above it again. She understood that. Most nights it was enough. At 9:12 p.m., the restaurant doors opened. Conversation dipped. Heads turned. Kang Min-jae entered.
Tall.
Immaculate charcoal suit. Silver tie pin shaped like a tiger, the Biko syndicate symbol. He walked like Manhattan belonged to him. Technically, parts of it did. Money laundering networks, shipping routes, nightclubs, investment fronts. He controlled enough territory to believe he was untouchable. Behind him walked 2 men, quiet, broad-shouldered, the kind of still that only comes from discipline. They stopped near the entrance while Kang moved ahead alone. He sat at the VIP table without waiting to be seated. Manager Lee hurried over, bowing slightly. Chairman Kang, welcome. Kang barely nodded. Bring me your best soju. And someone competent. Manager Lee hesitated. Just a flicker, barely visible. I'll assign Nia. She is very capable. Kang's eyes flicked up. Not American. She is. Not American, Kang repeated. Lee swallowed. She speaks Korean. Kang waved a dismissive hand. Send her. Nia approached with calm precision. Good evening, sir. Welcome to Myri. Kong looked her up and down slowly. Dark skin, steady posture, unapologetic eye contact. His lip curled. You understand Korean? He asked in English. Yes, sir. He switched languages instantly, rapid Seoul dialect, the kind designed to trip people. Then bring me an ong soju. Not this diluted garbage Americans drink. And tell your chef not to insult me with fusion nonsense. Yes, sir. He leaned back. And after tonight, you won't be working here. The words were casual, thrown like a coin. She didn't react. I don't tolerate attitude, he continued. And you looked at me like we were equals. The surrounding businessmen laughed softly, the careful laugh of men who knew better but calculated that silence cost more. Manager Lee stepped forward quickly. Chairman Kong, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. There hasn't. Kong cut him off. Fire her. And make sure she doesn't find work in this city again. I'll make a call. He reached for his phone. That was when Lee made a critical mistake. Chairman, you should reconsider. She is not. Kong slammed his hand on the table. Are you questioning me? Silence. The restaurant didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in pieces, one table, then another, until the only sound was the faint pull of ambient music no one was listening to anymore. Lee stepped back. Nia stood perfectly still, just those steady eyes, looking at him without retreat. Understood, sir, she said evenly. She turned and walked toward the kitchen. The room buzzed with low murmurs. Kong smirked. Power reaffirmed. Lesson delivered. He didn't see the way Manager Lee stared at him with something close to pity. He didn't see the way one of the Korean businessmen near the window quietly sent a message from beneath the table. He didn't see any of it, because men like Kong rarely looked behind them. At 11:43 p.m., Nia clocked out. She changed into a simple coat and stepped into the cold Manhattan night. The air was sharp. A cab passed. Somewhere down the block, two men argued in Spanish and then laughed. She didn't cry. She didn't call a friend. She called one number. It rang once.
Twice.
Then a calm voice answered. Yes. Appa, she said quietly. Silence. Not cold. Measured. The kind of silence that listens before it speaks. You were dismissed? Park Tae-shin asked. Yes. Explain.
She did.
Every word. Every tone. Every insult. Every order to blacklist her. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't soften. She didn't editorialize. She simply reported. When she finished, the line was quiet for 5 full seconds.
She counted them.
Then her father spoke. You maintained composure? Yes. You did not reveal your identity?
No.
A slow exhale. Not of frustration, of assessment. Good. She waited. Come home, he said. The Park residence in Manhattan was discreet. Not flashy. Not obvious. A brownstone in a quiet block that looked like it belonged to a professor or a retired diplomat. Nothing about the exterior suggested what moved inside it. But the security was layered in ways that couldn't be seen from the street. By the time Nia entered the private study, 3 men were already present, senior figures of the Baekdu Alliance, men who had known Nia since she was a child learning to bow correctly at formal dinners. Her father stood by the window. Silver hair, impeccable posture, eyes sharp as broken glass. He turned. There was no rage on his face, which, to anyone who knew him, made it worse. Kang Min-jae, he said slowly, has forgotten protocol. One of the men beside him shifted. Chairman, should we handle it? Park Tae-shin's gaze moved from the man to Nia. This was your humiliation. You will decide. That was the rule. In the Baekdu Alliance, accountability ran in both directions. Even upward. She met his eyes. He didn't listen, she said calmly. Manager Lee tried to tell him. Her father's jaw tightened, barely visible, but she knew every register of his face. Lee tried to stop it 3 times. That detail landed in the room with weight. He picked up his phone. He dialed a number Kang Min-jae would never ignore. It rang once. Kong, Park said. On the other end, there was the sound of a chair, then stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when the body understands something before the mind catches up. Chairman Park. You ordered my daughter fired tonight. Silence. Absolute. The kind that has no floor.
What?
Kang's voice cracked. You were told to listen. You did not. Chairman, I was unaware. You were warned. I didn't know she was. You did not ask. The air in the study felt heavy. Even the three men who had heard Park Tae-shin dismantle men over the phone before seemed to hold their breath. I will correct this immediately, Kang rushed. I'll apologize personally. You will come to me, Park said softly. And the call ended. If you're wondering what it feels like when a predator realizes he's walked into a larger predator's territory, stay with this story. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Because this is where the tables turn. The next evening, Kang Min-jae entered the Park residence. He did not walk like he owned Manhattan. He walked like a man who had spent the last 24 hours quietly reviewing every decision he had ever made. His suit was still immaculate. His posture still controlled. But something behind his eyes had shifted, the particular recalibration of a man who has suddenly remembered that the world is larger than his reflection. Inside the study, Park Tae-shin sat behind a polished wooden desk. Nia stood beside him, not in a waitress uniform, in a tailored black suit.
Hair down. No apron.
No name tag. Just herself. Kang's eyes landed on her. Recognition. Then understanding. Then something he hadn't felt in years.
Fear.
You, he breathed. Nia held his gaze calmly. The same way she had in the restaurant. The same eyes. The same stillness. Only now there was no uniform between them. Nothing to misread. Nothing to dismiss. Park spoke. You ordered my daughter blacklisted. Kang bowed deeply. Lower than he had bowed to anyone in a long time. I made a terrible mistake. You were informed to listen, Park continued. You silenced the manager. I was unaware of her identity. That, Park said quietly, is the problem. The room felt smaller than its dimensions. You judged her by her uniform, Park went on. By her skin. By assumption. You acted on incomplete information and called it authority. Kang swallowed. I take full responsibility. Park leaned back slowly, the unhurried movement of a man who has never needed to rush. In this business, information is survival. You acted without it. You silenced the one person in that room trying to give it to you. Nia stepped forward slightly. You didn't even let him finish, she said softly. Her voice held no anger. That was somehow more devastating than if it had. Kang looked at her, really looked, not through her, not past her, at her. No longer a waitress. Not a uniform. Not an inconvenience.
A daughter.
A deliberate presence. A woman who had stood in front of his contempt and not flinched once. I apologize, Kang said. She didn't smile. You tried to erase me, she said. Without knowing who I was. Without asking. Without a second thought. She let that sit. That's not just arrogance. That's carelessness. And in this world, carelessness is expensive. Park's voice cut through the tension with the precision of something final. Effective immediately, BICO operations in Manhattan will answer to Baekdu oversight. Quarterly reporting. Full transparency. Kang's head snapped up. Chairman. You overstepped. It wasn't negotiable. The tone made that clear. There was no appeal process in this room. Kang bowed again. Yes. He turned to Nia. I am sorry. She studied him for a long moment, long enough that the silence had shape. Then she nodded once. Be more careful who you underestimate. 3 weeks later, Myri Restaurant received a formal letter of apology, typed on BICO's syndicate letterhead, which had never before been used for anything resembling remorse. Manager Lee kept his job. More than that, he was quietly given a raise he never asked for and was never told the reason why. He suspected. He didn't ask. Business improved because word travels quickly in certain circles, and the story of what happened that night moved through Manhattan's Korean community like weather. Not loudly. Just steadily until everyone who needed to know knew. Nia returned to work for 2 more months. Not because she had to. because her father required it. Discipline is not about revenge, he told her one evening over tea in the study. Revenge is noise. Discipline is refinement. You endure not to suffer, but to become someone suffering cannot touch. She turned that over in her mind for days afterward. She thought about it while taking orders, while carrying plates, while standing at the host's stand watching the city move past the glass doors. She finished her term without revealing herself again, without exception, without shortcuts. And when the 2 months ended, Park Tae-shin looked at her across the desk and said nothing for a moment.
Then,
"You're ready." She didn't ask what for. She already knew. And Kang Min-jae? He never forgot the feeling of his blood turning cold when Park Tae-shin said the words, "You ordered my daughter fired." He had run operations for 20 years. He had sat across from prosecutors and rival bosses and men who wanted him gone. He had never felt what he felt in that study. Not fear of consequence. Fear of how easily he had been wrong. Power isn't loud. Real power doesn't need to shout. It waits. It watches. It wears a name tag that says Ente and carries your drink with perfect composure while you explain, in careful detail, exactly what kind of man you are. And when necessary, it corrects. If this story reminded you that you never truly know who you're dealing with, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where arrogance meets consequence. Because sometimes the waitress isn't just a waitress. Sometimes she's royalty in disguise. And sometimes the order you give becomes the mistake you regret.